The laughter came in two waves. The first was quiet, a low, shared smirk that traveled the length of the waiting area the moment Rhys Callander pushed through the glass doors of Meridian BioHealth's corporate headquarters and stopped to check the appointment number on his phone. The second wave came harder when he reached the reception desk and the security coordinator processing applicants glanced up from his clipboard, then back down, then up again, as though confirming what he'd seen was real. 17 men waited in the atrium on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Toronto. All of them looked assembled for the role. Broad shoulders, tactical posture, clothing that communicated readiness before a single word was spoken. Former military private contractors, a few who had clearly done this before at competing firms and wore their track records like armor. The room smelled of new leather and quiet ambition. Rhys looked like he had taken the wrong elevator up. His jacket was a dark wool blend, not expensive, not cheap, just worn in the way that suggested years of use rather than poverty. He carried a slim folder with a bent corner where, that morning, his 9-year-old daughter Ivy had pressed too hard with a green crayon and left a small turtle on the back cover. He hadn't noticed until the subway. He'd left it anyway. "Name," the coordinator asked. "Rhys Callander." "Previous employer?" "Federal contractor, intelligence support." A man 3 seats to his left repeated the words under his breath in a voice designed to carry. "Intelligence support." The emphasis fell on the second word in a way that drained it of meaning. The man was Brant Quinlan, former private protection circuit, 2 corporate safety contracts in Calgary built like a load-bearing wall. He stood up slowly, the way people do when they want the movement itself to make a point, and crossed to where Rhys was standing. "What kind of intelligence supports a bag like that?" He nodded toward the folder with a grin that invited everyone to agree. Several did. Rhys didn't look at Brant when he answered. He was still watching the room, the camera in the northeast corner that swept left every 8 seconds and paused, the reception guard favoring his left hip, the floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the whole space back in slight delay. 2 stairwell access panels, one with a loose magnetic seal. The north corridor camera angled 2 degrees off its bracket, probably since the last cleaning rotation. "The kind that notices you've already crossed the restricted badge line twice without being corrected," Rhys said. Brant blinked. The coordinator looked down at the floor marking. Brant was, in fact, standing 6 inches past the red strip on the tile. Nobody laughed that time. Above the atrium, behind smoke glass paneling on the mezzanine level, Astrid Beaumont stood with her arms folded and watched. She was the CEO of Meridian BioHealth. 51, precise, the kind of woman who had rebuilt a struggling pharmaceutical company over 8 years through a combination of clinical stubbornness and an almost unnerving ability to identify which problems were genuine and which were performed. She had approved the security director competition herself after 2 internal candidates failed their February breach simulations. She had not approved the anonymous addition to the applicant list that had appeared that morning under the name R. Callander submitted in person at reception, no digital record before 9:07 a.m. She was looking at him now because her assistant had pulled the file and found almost nothing in it, and in her experience, very little on paper usually meant a great deal in person. The evaluation session was scheduled to begin in 4 minutes. It never did. At 10:14 a.m., 3 things happened inside 11 seconds. Every monitor at the security desk flickered to static. The access panel to the server corridor on the 39th floor registered a badge swipe that shouldn't have existed. And the head of Meridian's internal IT security sent a message to Astrid's phone that read only, "Active exfiltration, clinical trial data, origin internal." The alarm that followed wasn't the theatrical kind. It was a single sustained tone, low and deliberate, the type designed not to evacuate but to lock down. Rhys was already moving before the second pulse finished. He didn't ask permission. He didn't check with the coordinator who was reaching for a radio and fumbling the frequency. He stepped past Brant, past the reception desk, pressed the stairwell door open using the emergency bar, and was 3 floors down before anyone in the atrium had decided what to do. Behind him, Brant called out something that came out angrier than it sounded authoritative. "That man has no clearance on this floor." The coordinator stared at the empty doorway, then at Brant, then at the monitor still running static. He reached for his radio again. The 39th floor was quieter than it should have been, and quiet in a building under active lockdown was the loudest possible signal. Rhys moved through the corridor with the particular stillness that only people who have spent years navigating other people's crises ever develop. Not slow, not careful in the cautious sense, but calibrated. He read the space as he walked. 2 office doors left open. Normal, during sudden lockdown, people leave fast. 1 door closed with a thread of light still visible underneath. A paper coffee cup near the IT operations wing with the lid still sealed, set down deliberately, not knocked over in a rush. He stopped at the IT wing entrance and listened. One voice inside, male, controlled in the way people control their voice when they're performing calm rather than feeling it. Rhys turned the handle without knocking. A man in his mid-40s sat at the primary workstation, fingers moving across a keyboard with quiet efficiency. He wore the badge of Meridian's Regulatory Affairs Division. He didn't look up when the door opened, which told Rhys he'd been expecting someone, just not this particular someone. Buildings in lockdown, Rhys said. The man looked up, adjusted his expression half a second too late. I'm aware. I'm running containment. On regulatory affairs credentials. A pause so brief most people would have missed it. My clearance was updated last quarter. Rhys looked at the screen, not the man. The active data pathway was outbound encrypted, routing to a mirror address that wasn't Meridian's internal architecture. That transfer's going somewhere off-network, Rhys said. The man stood abruptly and reached toward his jacket. Rhys crossed the room in 3 steps, caught the wrist, redirected the movement with a precise economy that had nothing flashy about it. No impact, no stagecraft, just a man's arm suddenly behind his own back and a chair placed between him and the door. The item in the jacket turned out to be a secondary access card, not a weapon. Rhys took it anyway. The man's badge identified him as Jeffrey Halcourt, VP of Regulatory Affairs. Rhys looked at the name for a moment longer than necessary. Something moved quietly at the back of his mind. A thread he couldn't yet locate, the particular sensation of a word encountered once in a context he couldn't immediately recover. He filed it and moved forward. He reached the internal security line he'd memorized from the sign-in sheet 40 minutes earlier and called it in. Then he waited. His phone rang. Ivy's aftercare program, he answered. Mr. Callander. The supervisor's voice was warm but apologetic. Ivy's been asking. She wanted me to tell you she finished the turtle drawing and she thinks you should keep the folder because it's lucky now. Rhys exhaled slowly, one hand still on Jeffrey's arm, locked at the shoulder, back against the workstation. Tell her the folder is definitely lucky, he said. I'll be there by 5. A small voice surfaced in the background, bright and uncomplicated the way 9-year-olds were before the world began teaching them to modulate. Did he win? Did Dad win? Not yet, he said before the supervisor could answer. Tell her not yet. He ended the call. Jeffrey had been watching him with the expression of a man quietly recalculating. Your daughter, Jeffrey said. Rhys looked at him with a flatness that wasn't hostility, just the absence of any invitation. Don't. Astrid arrived with 2 of Meridian's genuine security staff 11 minutes later. She stood in the doorway and looked at Jeffrey, seated in the chair, the access card on the desk, the outbound transfer paused midstream on the monitor, the timestamp log visible on the secondary screen. She looked at Rhys. How did you reach this floor before my team? Your team was looking for the right radio frequency, he said. I was already in the stairwell. She walked past him to the monitor and studied the transfer log without touching anything. The destination address was encrypted, but the timestamp sequence told its own story. The exfiltration had begun 3 minutes before the lockdown alarm. Someone had triggered the breach and the alarm as separate timed events, so the alarm would bury the data movement inside the noise of the response. This was staged to look reactive, she said. Whoever designed it expected your security response to follow protocol, Rhys said. Evacuate upward, lock server access, audit after. The data would have been gone before anyone reached the audit stage. Astrid looked at Jeffrey. What data? He said nothing. His composure hadn't fully collapsed, but it had narrowed. The look of a man still calculating odds, rather than someone who had accepted they were finished. Astrid's assistant, a young woman named Bianca Trent, who had followed her down the stairwell at a half-jog and was still catching her breath, handed across a tablet. Astrid read it. Her face did something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. The particular expression of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed that they had spent considerable energy hoping was wrong. The outbound pathway maps to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, Bianca said quietly. Legal flagged this holding structure 8 months ago during a routine regulatory review. The flag was closed without action. She paused. By regulatory affairs. The room went very still. The Phase 3 trial data, Astrid said, not a question. Bianca nodded. The thread at the back of Rhys's mind pulled tighter and tighter until it finally arrived. Not as an explosion, but as a weight settling precisely into a place where he had long been carrying a corresponding emptiness without fully understanding its shape. Phase 3 trials, regulatory affairs, a shell company, a compliance flag that had been quietly closed. Lena, his wife, 8 years ago working a federal contract for Health Canada's compliance division. A pharmaceutical audit she couldn't discuss at home, which he had respected without question because he had his own files he never brought to the dinner table, and they had agreed early in their marriage that certain silences were professional and not personal. She had been frustrated in the weeks before February, not frightened, not what he would have recognized as frightened at the time, just that specific frustration of someone who has found something real and is watching it be methodically papered over. She died on the 401 outside Kingston, black ice. The Highway Traffic Act report was thorough. The coroner's findings were clear. He had never had a reason to question them. He was looking at a reason now. Jeffrey Halcourt, Rhys said slowly. The VP looked at him. You were VP of Product Compliance at Vantis Pharmaceutical before Meridian acquired the portfolio. He was organizing it aloud, not for the room, but because the sequence needed to be spoken to become fully real. Vantis ran a Phase 2 trial in 2016 with 3 unreported adverse events. The Health Canada compliance review was closed without action because the internal audit submission had been amended before filing. No one in the room moved. My wife was the federal auditor assigned to that file, Rhys said. 4 seconds of silence. In a small room under fluorescent light, 4 seconds is a long time. Jeffrey's face changed, not into guilt, exactly, but into something more telling than guilt. Relief. The almost imperceptible relief of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to be named and can now stop bracing for the moment it will be. People with nothing to hide look surprised when conversations end. Jeffrey looked relieved. That's a significant thing to suggest, Jeffrey said very carefully. It's a sequence, Rhys said. You can answer questions about it later, under caution and with counsel present. He turned to Astrid. I'd recommend RCMP commercial crime rather than your internal team, and I'd recommend placing the call before his external contact receives notification the transfer was interrupted. Astrid held his gaze for one long moment. Then she looked at Bianca. Make the call, and to her security staff, nobody leaves this floor. Jeffrey stood. One of the officers put a hand on his shoulder, and he sat back down with the slow, deliberate movement of a man choosing his battles. Brant Quinlan arrived on the 39th floor 25 minutes later with 3 of Meridian's internal guard staff, and the energy of someone who had decided the situation requires bzzz. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Jeffrey seated and secured. The external transfer terminated, an RCMP commercial crime investigator already on the phone with Bianca in the hallway, and Rhys standing near the window with a paper cup of water someone had brought him from the break room kitchenette. Brant's expression cycled through several phases quickly. He settled on authority as a reflex. This man was not authorized to be on this floor, he said to the nearest guard, gesturing toward Rhys. Astrid looked up from the tablet she'd been working through. He was authorized by me as of approximately 40 minutes ago. A brief pause, retroactively. Brant's mouth opened, then closed. Rhys didn't look at him. He was watching the street 42 floors below, the grid of downtown Toronto in the particular flat light of a March afternoon. Pedestrians moving along King Street without knowing that 6 floors above a server room, someone had just spent 8 years expecting to never be found, and had been found inside 11 minutes by a man with a lucky turtle on his folder. He thought about Lena, found to his own surprise that the thought arrived differently than it usually did, less like reaching into an open wound and more like finally seeing the outline of a door he hadn't known was there. Not closed, not open, just newly visible, which was its own kind of beginning. He didn't know yet whether Jeffrey Halcourt had arranged what happened on the 401 that February. That was a question for investigators and lawyers, and a process that moved slowly and without drama, and rarely delivered the clean resolution that grief wanted. He knew what the sequence pointed toward. He had given it to the people with the tools to follow it. The rest wasn't his alone to carry, and he was tired enough to finally understand the difference. His phone rang again. He answered before the second ring. Mr. Callander, I'm very sorry to bother you again. The aftercare supervisor sounded like she was trying not to smile. Ivy wanted me to ask one more thing. A short pause. She wants to know if the turtle on the folder helped. He looked down at the bent green corner of the folder he'd been holding the entire time without realizing it. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her it absolutely did. she says, a brief sound of 9-year-old certainty in the background, that full-bodied confidence that hadn't yet been complicated by the world. She says she knew. She says she picked the lucky one on purpose. Something in his chest shifted. Not broke, not opened dramatically, just shifted, the way a long-carried weight redistributes when you set part of it down for the first time and realize the setting down was always available to you. "I'll be there by 5, he said. "Tell her I'll explain everything over dinner." He ended the call and turned to find Astrid standing closer than he'd expected. "You have a daughter," she said. "Ivy 9. He looked at the folder again. "She drew a turtle on my application this morning and told me it would help." Astrid's expression didn't soften exactly. She wasn't someone who performed softness, but it became more precise in a different direction, the way certain people's faces do when they encounter something that confirms rather than surprises. She wasn't wrong. Rhys looked at the monitor where the terminated transfer still glowed. "You're going to need to reconstruct your full compliance review chain. Everything Halcourt had authorization to access, and for how long. The investigators will want the complete Vantis acquisition file and everything that transferred with the portfolio." "I know." "And the 2016 Health Canada compliance file on the Vantis Phase 2 trial should be formally referred for reopening," he said. "Not as a condition, as the right thing to do." She studied him for a long moment. "I agree on both." The quiet that followed was a different kind of quiet than the one on the empty floor 20 minutes earlier. This one had room in it. "The position," Astrid said, "the one that was posted. Brant Quinlan downstairs has the credentials that read well on paper. You have something different." She didn't elaborate on what that difference was, because she was the kind of person who believed that if you'd just witnessed what she had witnessed, elaboration was condescending. Those are not the same thing. Rhys didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the city, at the lake beyond the office towers, at the particular quality of afternoon light over Lake Ontario in March. Honest and unembellished, and better than it had any right to be after a gray winter. He thought about what came after this. Not the job exactly, but what came after treating the future like a place you arrived at by surviving long enough, rather than somewhere you might actually choose to go. "Tuesdays and Thursdays I leave by 4:30, he said. "Ivy has French immersion and swimming on alternating weeks, and neither one waits." He glanced briefly toward the door where Jeffrey Halcourt was being processed with quiet efficiency. "And I'd want it in writing that Meridian will formally support the re-referral of the 2016 file." Astrid considered this for about 4 seconds, which was how long a decision of that kind actually required when the person making it had already made it. "Done," she said. Ivy arrived in Meridian's lobby at 6:15 in her winter coat half unzipped because she ran warm, and had never fully accepted that Toronto in March required complete compliance on the zipper front. Ms. Tremblay from Aftercare had driven her over at Astrid's quiet request, conveyed through Bianca, who had been managing what the day had become with the focused calm of someone who had stopped being surprised by Tuesdays a long time ago. Ivy stopped when she saw the bandage on Rhys's forearm, a clean wrap over a friction burn from the server room floor, nothing serious but visible. She stood still for a moment in the middle of the marble lobby, coat open, backpack sliding, doing the particular assessment that children who had experienced real loss learned to do. Reading the adult's face for what the adult wasn't saying. Rhys crouched down to her level. "You're hurt," she said. "Not badly, I promise." She looked at his face carefully. "Your serious face is different from your hurt face. That one is your tired face." "All 3, he admitted, in that order." She stepped forward and put both arms around his neck the way she'd been doing since she was small enough to be carried. No hesitation, no asking, just the complete and uncomplicated certainty that she was allowed to, that this was simply what you did. He held her with the arm that didn't ache, and felt the particular weight of her against him, the realness of her, the way she remained the most grounding thing in any day that tried to come apart. After a moment, she leaned back and looked past him to the woman standing near the reception desk. "Are you the boss?" she asked, in the direct register that 9-year-olds brought to all conversations of substance. "Of this building, yes," Astrid said. Ivy considered this. "Did my dad help you today?" Astrid glanced briefly at Rhys, very much. Ivy looked back at him with the expression of a child who has been vindicated in something she was never in doubt about. "I told you the turtle was lucky." "You did," he said. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Another drawing, better condition than the folder, a larger turtle in green crayon, with what appeared to be a small rectangular badge drawn onto its shell. She held it up for him to see. I made a new one at aftercare, she said. Miss Tremblay said you probably got the job. I made a badge turtle for the new job. He took the drawing, looked at it for a moment, the careful crayon lines, the badge she had decided a working turtle would need, the small, confident signature she put in the corner of everything she made. He folded it once and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, against the worn lining, where it would lie flat and stay. Outside, the last of Toronto's March light was settling across the lake in that brief window of early evening gold that lasted about 10 minutes and made the city look, briefly and genuinely, like somewhere worth staying. Ivy slipped her hand into his and pulled gently toward the doors. Can we get dinner on the way home? Somewhere warm, she thought about it. Soup. I want soup. Rhys straightened, folder under his arm, drawing in his pocket, her hand in his. He looked back once at Astrid, who gave a small, specific nod, the kind that meant tomorrow and the day after and the long, serious, necessary work of making something better than what came before. Soup, he said to Ivy, absolutely. She led him toward the door the way she always did, like she already knew exactly where they were going, and all he had to do was follow.